So I will turn it over to Mrs. Maxwell here.
Hi, Eamonn. How are you?
Oh, good. How are you?
Good. So I let the kids know that you were going to be talking to them today as they are finalizing their letters to the editor.
Okay.
They are in their final steps in the next 3 days. They will be submitting to the Quad City Times. So they today are going to be working on crafting catchy headlines, anything that will catch the reader's attention. I had told them that this morning I went through the paper and I looked at several articles and said, nope, and letters to the editor, and I only read one of them because the headline didn't grab my attention. So that was an example that I kind of used for them. So if you can give them your journalistic background and then maybe what you do in your writing process when you come to the final stages and how you catch readers' attention, that'd be great.
Okay. Well, to start, my name is Eammon Brennan. I am from Davenport. I went to Assumption High School, so not too far from where you guys are. I always wanted to do journalism or something like it. I realized pretty early on that I was bad at math, so I needed to do something with words. So it was either that or be a lawyer. And by the time I was in high school, I was really interested in journalism. So I went to Indiana University. I studied journalism there. I worked for the student newspaper. I did some jobs in the summer, some internships. I also started a website with my friend Ryan. And from that website, we got a job offer to write for AOL while we were still in college. I did that for a couple of years. I did a lot of freelance stuff. Had some different jobs along the way as an editor and a writer. And long story short, in 2009, after writing at Yahoo for a couple of years, I was hired by ESPN to do college basketball stuff. And so that's what I've been doing ever since. So I'll be 6 years in a few days here, actually, working for ESPN, writing about college basketball. And I do a little bit of everything. I blogged for a really long time. I still do some of that. I write feature stories. I write columns, quick little things. I do video stuff, pretty much you name it, and we do it. And so it's a lot of fun, and it's an interesting time of year right now with the season really getting going. But I'm happy to be here talking to you guys. So for headlines and for catching a reader's attention, I still have to do some headlines. I used to have to do a lot. And now I have editors who primarily do the headlines, which is how the process typically goes. The writer will write something, and then an editor will come in and read it and edit it and then give it a headline or change the headline. That's the traditional model anyway. A lot of times now, because people are putting things up so much more quickly, than it used. The newspaper used to be you get a story written and you give it to your editor, and then the next day it shows up in this hard printed copy. That's not as much the model, at least not for me anymore. So I still do some headline stuff and that, and I'll get to that in a second. But primarily for me, the way I try and catch readers' attention is in the body of my article, right? And the most important thing is the beginning, because if you think about how people use the internet, and you guys yourselves or anyone you know, it can be very distracting, right? Like you can have one thing happening over here, and maybe you're reading something, and then the next thing you know, you get a thing that pops up on your phone or on your computer, and you've got an email or a text message or Snapchat or whatever, and all of a sudden you're gone from that and you forget to go back to the story. And for us, as writers and people who want people to stick with our stuff, that's a difficult challenge. So the most important thing that I try and do in my writing is catch people in my first paragraph or my first couple of paragraphs. And that's not a new strategy, but it's especially important now with the way people read things. And the most important thing is to maybe pose a question or present kind of a mystery or something really interesting up at the front, or just write one sentence that's just really strong and declarative and interesting for people, so that when they read that, they say, oh, I've got to finish this. This sounds really interesting. And then you've got them for a little while longer and you keep trying to bring them through your story. The same goes for what you guys are working on with letters to the editor. Obviously, the same goes for headlines, and headlines are probably the most important part of that process, because a lot of times people won't have a chance to see any of the text of an article. They'll just see the headline, and whether or not they decide to click on it or read further is largely dependent on the headline. So grabbing people's attention in the headline is extremely important. Headlines get people to pay attention to what you're doing. And so that a lot of the same principles apply, but they have to be much more condensed. So word choice is really important. You want to use words that are strong, that have meaning. You don't want a lot of flimsy words or words that are very common, and if. That the traditional headline model, so if you're thinking about the Quad City Times or the New York Times or newspapers, it's sort of very straightforward. And here's the most essential thing you need to know about the story you're about to read right up at the top. And that model is still very prevalent because it works and it has 200 years of history behind it. But lately, you'll also see a lot of, in the past few years, particularly from internet publications, headlines that try and speak to people on a personal level. So you would never see a headline in the New York Times 5 or 10 years ago that said, you should read this story about Eammon Brennan's talk to the sixth graders in Bettendorf. But you see headlines like that all the time now of here's why you should do something, or here's why, here's a conversational way that I'm introducing this topic to you. So there are a couple different approaches these days, but the most important thing is to be very clear and very strong in what you're trying to say right off the bat, and to really try and think about, if I was a person who didn't know anything about the topic that I'm writing about or that I'm editing right now, what would I say to them to grab them and force them to sit down and read it? And it's a difficult thing to do, but it's a really important skill to learn. So,
do you guys have any questions or anything on your mind based on what he said that you would like to ask him? Is there anybody that would like to ask a specific question related to their topic? Why don't you hop up here, Dallas, so we can see you and hear on the speaker?
What are some good words to use in a headline to get people's attention?
Well, I mean, there are lots of them, so that's tough. We could probably build a pretty long list if we sat down and thought about it for a while, but I'll give you an example. So I wrote about, yesterday I wrote about a player at LSU. His name's Ben Simmons, and he's an incredible player. He's a freshman, and he's going to go to the NBA after this year in college, no questions asked. He'll probably be the number one pick, and he's having an incredible season, but his team is 4-4. His coach isn't very good, and his teammates are playing really poorly, and so they're losing games to bad teams, and it should be difficult to have a player that good and to have your team not be very good. You have to kind of try to be that bad. So for what I did is I was sort of sitting there thinking about writing it, and I was going through the thing, and I had a couple different headlines, and I think one of them was LSU is in a bad place, or LSU is 4-4 and needs to get better fast. And those might have worked, but by the time I got done with my article, I went back through and thought about it, and I ended up going with LSU is wasting Ben Simmons. And if you think about the word wasting, it's not the most powerful word in the world, but it's one verb, right? And it gets across the idea that we're talking about, that this guy's going to be in college for 1 year, that he's really good, and that his team's not taking advantage of him in a really clear and declarative way. And so that's the kind of word that you want to look for. You want to look for something that's very descriptive, that has meaning, that is simple and straightforward and to the point, but that is powerful as well.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wants to ask him a question specifically about their headline or topic?
Yeah.
Come all the way up to the chair, so.
So like when you read the newspaper, do you like always read something based on the headline?
Yes, a lot of times. I mean, I think, when you think about the way I do my job is I'm either traveling on the road at games and doing and covering stuff and talking to coaches and players, or I work from home in my office here. And so keeping up on what's going on a daily basis has always been a big part of my job. And the primary way I do that is through RSS feeds, which you guys probably or may never have heard of because I'm 30 years old and they make me sound like an old man talking about them. It's kind of sad, but they're really helpful. Just no one uses them anymore. I'm holding on for dear life. But the other way is, through like Twitter or Facebook or whatever, where you've got this feed of headlines coming down the page, right? And I go to specific websites and I click around and I seek stuff out. But a lot of times during the day and at night when college basketball is on, I'm looking at people's headlines in their Twitter feeds. And so the difference between where, unless it's a topic I'm just inherently interested in, right? The difference of whether or not I'm going to click through and leave an application or leave the window on my computer and go to that page and read the article is the headline. So yeah, a lot of times you do find yourself reading a story based on a headline. And a good headline, if it's not something I'm interested in already, can get me to go read it just because, oh, wow, that looks interesting. Whereas, there will always be stuff that I'm going to click on and read, even if it's the most boring headline in the world, because I need that information for my job. But there are plenty of instances where there are probably stories that if the headline wasn't as interesting and I didn't see it, I would have never read it. But because the headline was so interesting, I click on it, I'm there, and I'm reading about it. So it's definitely something I do on a daily basis.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Emily, did you want to ask him yours?
When you're randomly reading a paragraph, when you read the first sentence, do you usually get hooked onto the first sentence and want to read more?
Yeah, usually. I mean, if it's good, then that's typically how it works. Because, think about how you guys read, and you have a lot more school ahead of you, so you'll get more and more used to this idea, especially when you get later into high school and college when you've got a ton of stuff to read all the time. Sometimes it's just not possible for you to read every word of everything that you've been assigned. In college, I remember I would, when I had these long reading assignments that were 50 or 100 pages that I had to get done by the next night, you have to be able to read in a way that you get the information, but you're not sitting there concentrating on every single word of every paragraph and every sentence. So it becomes kind of a natural tendency, I think, for people as they grow up and they get out of school to skim and to scan and to pass over a lot of stuff. And when I've got a story that's 800 words or 1,000 words, that's a decent size, but it's not a ton. And so you really don't want people skimming everything. Or if I wrote a feature story about Iowa State last week, and there are lots. It's a long story, but the idea is to keep people interested enough to want to read every word of every paragraph and to write it well enough so that they do. So yes, I do find myself doing that a lot. And what I'm trying to say is it's an important skill to be able to write a good first sentence in every paragraph and to transition from paragraph to paragraph really well. Because if you do that well enough over, an extended period of time in your story, then people will just get into the habit of reading every sentence that you have. But yes, in the same way that headlines get people interested and the first part of the story gets people interested on a smaller level, the first sentence of your paragraph gets people interested in the rest of the paragraph.
Did you have a question, Kiara?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
What type of headlines do you get dragged into? Like questions or like facts or?
Yeah, that's a good one. I've got a couple windows pulled open here, and I'll see if I can find a couple that. So here's one. This is just at the top of my RSS feeds. It's from a website called The Verge, which is about technology, and it says Spotify's new tool will import your audio music collection for you. And I'm not inherently interested in that because I didn't have RDO. But the fact that they added, and like I said, you see this a lot now, will do this. It will do this for you. It won't just say Spotify's new tool will import customers' RDO music collections. That's the older model of headlines, right? Instead of that, it says it will do it for you. And so I'm thinking, oh wow, this thing will do this for me. That's interesting. Maybe I should check this out. And here's another one. It's from a website called Vox, and it says the bottom line on whether Iran tried to build nuclear weapons. That is a pretty good and succinct way of saying what this story is going to be about, and the sort of complex stuff that this, national and geopolitical stuff that this story is going to be about, and telling me by the time you get done reading this, you will know what you need to know about this topic, right? So that's another good way to do it. And sometimes those headlines, sometimes catchy headlines are not necessarily good headlines, but because you don't want to go too far in one direction, right? But I think that does a nice job of communicating to me not only what the story is about, but what I am going to get out of reading it. Does that make sense? Okay. Yep.
Patrick.
Which thing do you think usually draws people in more, the topic sentence or the title of the story?
Well, I think it just depends on where you see it. So like ours is a good example. So like at ESPN, the story I did about Iowa State last week, the headline was pretty straightforward and pretty simple. But because of the way our website is structured and the way our pages on our website are structured, when you get to the page, you're not going to see the same headline that you saw if you're on the ESPN.com page or if you came from somewhere else, right? So in that instance, then yeah, the topic sentence, the first sentence, what we call a lead, is probably more important because people are already there, right? They've already clicked on it one way or the other. They've seen it somewhere. And now they have to decide whether or not they want to devote 15 or 20 minutes of their time to reading this story. And so in that case, yeah, the lead is probably more important. But if you haven't had a chance to see anything about the story yet, and all you're seeing is a list of headlines, or you're on a web page like ESPN.com, and you're kind of scrolling down the page, and you're seeing photos, and you've got all this stuff that you could click on and you could look at that point, yeah, the headline is much more important because that's what gets people to pay attention in the first place and to click through and see it and think about it on a level beyond just scanning it on a page with a bunch of other headlines.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Are there any other questions that people have? Any other last pieces of advice that you would like to know? Last chance. All right. Thank you. We would like to thank you for your time, and it's been very helpful. And I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but your mother is here. Did you?
Oh, I can see her. Yeah.
Okay. I have a question.
Hi, Mom. Okay.
What are you getting your mother for Christmas?
I've already got your present, so don't worry about it.
Okay.
I got to do some Christmas shopping.
Just a little reminder, that's all. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, and we appreciate all of the time that you've given the students and all of the advice.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime.
Thank you.
Happy to do it. Yeah, have fun, guys.
Bye.
Bye.